The morning the storm warnings went red across Colorado, I was already chaining up my F-350 in the driveway when I saw her marching toward me like a woman on a mission straight from hell. I had been living in Pinewood Meadows subdivision in Colorado Springs for about 8 months, running my small commercial landscaping business out of my house on Timber Ridge Drive. The neighborhood was nice enough, though the HOA had a reputation for being strict about everything from mailbox colors to lawn height. I had been careful to follow every rule in their massive binder of regulations, parking my work truck in the garage when possible and keeping my property immaculate. But today, with a massive winter storm bearing down on the Front Range, I had bigger concerns than HOA politics. Excuse me," she called out, her voice cutting through the howling wind that was already picking up. "What do you think you are doing?" I looked up from where I was securing the tire chains on my rear wheels. The woman approaching was maybe 50 years old, wearing an expensive parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was styled in that particular way that screamed, "I need to speak to the manager," and her face was already twisted in disapproval. "Putting chains on my truck," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Storm's supposed to hit hard in about 2 hours. I need to get to a job site in Monument and back before it gets bad. I am Patricia Henderson, president of the Pinewood Meadows HOA," she announced, as if I should drop everything and salute. "And I need you to remove those immediately." I straightened up, wiping my cold hands on my jeans. The temperature was already dropping fast, and dark clouds were rolling in from the north like an invading army. "Remove what? The chains?" "Yes, those horrible metal contraptions. They are unsightly and they damage the roads in our community. It is specifically mentioned in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of our HOA regulations that residents may not use tire chains on community streets." I stared at her for a long moment, wondering if she was serious. "Madam, there is a major winter storm warning. The State Patrol has already announced chain requirements for commercial vehicles on Highway 25. I need these to legally operate my truck." Patricia crossed her arms over her chest. "I do not care what the State Patrol says. In this community, I am the authority and our rules clearly state no tire chains. They tear up the asphalt, they make terrible noise, and they look absolutely trashy. Remove them or face a fine." A fine? I could not believe what I was hearing. "Lady, I have a job to do. A client's property needs emergency prep before this storm hits. I will be gone in 10 minutes and back before the worst of it. Nobody is going to care about some chain noise when we are getting 2 feet of snow." "The rules apply regardless of weather," Patricia said, her voice getting shriller. "Remove them now, or I will have them removed for you." I turned back to my truck, deciding this conversation was not worth my time. "I am leaving right now. When I get back, they will be off. That's the best I can do." "That is not acceptable," she snapped. I ignored her, climbing into my truck and starting the engine. Through my rearview mirror, I watched her standing in my driveway, her phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. I shook my head and pulled out, the chains making that distinctive crunching sound on the pavement. The job in Monument took longer than expected. My client, an elderly woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, needed her gutters cleared and downspouts secured before the storm hit. She lived alone and was worried about ice dams damaging her roof. I worked as quickly as I could, but by the time I finished, the first snowflakes were already falling. Big, heavy flakes that meant business. The drive back to Colorado Springs was tense. The storm was intensifying faster than the meteorologists had predicted. Wind gusts were pushing my truck around on the highway, and visibility was dropping by the minute. Other vehicles were pulling off at exits, deciding to wait it out. But I pushed on, confident in my truck's capabilities and the chains gripping the increasingly slick road. When I finally pulled back onto my street 2.5 hours after I had left, there were already 4 inches of snow on the ground. The neighborhood looked like a winter postcard, all the houses with their perfect landscaping now buried under white. I was exhausted and cold, looking forward to parking my truck and settling in for a long evening by the fireplace. But as I pulled into my driveway, something was wrong. Very wrong. My garage door was open, which I definitely had not left that way. And my chains, the heavy-duty commercial-grade chains I had just used to safely navigate the storm, were gone. Not lying on the ground where someone might have removed them. Not cut or damaged, just completely gone. I jumped out of the truck, my boots crunching in the snow. The chains had been properly installed when I parked. I walked around my vehicle twice, checking each wheel, hoping I was somehow mistaken. But no, all 4 sets of chains had been removed and taken. "You have got to be kidding me," I muttered, pulling out my phone. Before I could dial anything, my neighbor from across the street, a decent guy named Marcus Chen, came jogging over. He was bundled up in winter gear, looking concerned. "Tyler, man, you are not going to believe what happened," Marcus said, slightly out of breath. "That HOA lady, Patricia, she came back about an hour after you left. She had 2 guys with her and they opened your garage and took the chains off your truck." My jaw dropped. "She what?" I saw the whole thing. I was clearing my driveway when she showed up. "She used some kind of garage door opener device, one of those universal ones I guess, and opened your garage. Then these 2 guys, they looked like maintenance workers or something. They went in and removed all your chains, threw them in the back of a white pickup and drove off." "Did you get a license plate?" I asked, already feeling my anger rising. "Yeah, I took some pictures actually. The whole thing seemed sketchy to me. I tried to tell them they should not be going into your property without permission, but Patricia said she had the authority as HOA president to remove code violations." Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me several photos of the incident. Clear images of Patricia supervising while 2 men in gray coveralls removed my chains. "I figured you would want documentation." "Marcus, you are a lifesaver," I said, quickly texting the photos to my own phone. "This is insane. Those chains cost me $400. And more importantly, they are legally required equipment for my commercial vehicle." "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "First, I am calling the police. This is theft, plain and simple." I dialed 911 and explained the situation to the dispatcher. She seemed somewhat confused by the HOA angle, but agreed to send an officer once the storm conditions improved. Current emergency protocol meant only critical calls were being answered, and theft from a driveway was not making the cut with multiple accidents on the highways. "Someone will be out tomorrow morning to take a report," the dispatcher told me. "In the meantime, document everything and do not confront the individuals involved." I hung up feeling frustrated but tried to stay calm. The snow was really coming down now, at least 6 inches on the ground and no sign of stopping. I pulled my truck into the garage and closed the door, making a mental note to change my garage door code immediately. Inside my house, I made coffee and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I pulled up the HOA regulations that I had received when I purchased the house. The document was 68 pages long, filled with rules about everything imaginable. I searched for the section Patricia had mentioned about tire chains. There it was, on page 34. Section 12, paragraph 4. Residents are discouraged from using tire chains on community roadways during normal weather conditions, as they may cause damage to asphalt surfaces. Alternative traction devices are preferred, discouraged, not prohibited. And with a specific caveat about normal weather conditions. This was definitely not normal weather. I took screenshots of the entire section and saved them to a folder labeled HOA theft. The storm raged through the night. I woke up several times to the sound of wind howling and snow pounding against my windows. By morning, there were 16 inches of fresh powder covering everything, with drifts reaching 3 feet in some areas. The power had stayed on, thankfully, but the neighborhood was completely snowed in. I spent the morning shoveling my driveway and walkway, the physical labor helping me work through my anger about the stolen chains. Around 10 o'clock, a Colorado Springs Police Department SUV carefully made its way down my street, chains of its own crunching through the snow. Officer Daniel Reeves was a stocky guy in his 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. He took off his hat as he stepped into my entryway, stomping snow off his boots. "You are Tyler Oakes?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. "That's me. Thanks for coming out in this mess." "Part of the job," he said with a slight smile. "Now, tell me about these stolen tire chains." I walked him through the entire story, from Patricia's initial confrontation to Marcus's eyewitness account and photos. Officer Reeves took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I showed him the HOA regulation about tire chains, he frowned. "This says discouraged, not prohibited," he observed, "and only during normal weather conditions. We had mandatory chain laws in effect yesterday." "Exactly," I said. "I operate a commercial vehicle for my landscaping business. I am required by state law to have chains available and to use them when conditions warrant. Yesterday definitely warranted." Officer Reeves nodded slowly. "Here is the thing, Mr. Oakes. This is definitely theft, no question about it. The HOA president, regardless of what authority she thinks she has, cannot enter your property without permission and remove your belongings. That is a clear violation of Colorado law." "So what happens now?" I asked. "I will go have a conversation with Miss Henderson, get her side of the story. Find out where your chains are. At minimum, she needs to return them immediately. Depending on her attitude and cooperation, we may file charges." He tucked his notepad into his jacket pocket. "Do you have receipts for the chains? Proof of purchase?" "Absolutely. I bought them at a truck supply place in Denver 3 months ago. $427 with tax." I pulled up the receipt on my phone and forwarded it to the email address Officer Reeves provided. "Good. That helps establish value." In Colorado, theft of property valued over $300 can be a Class 2 misdemeanor or even a Class 6 felony depending on circumstances. He handed me his card. "I will be in touch later today. In the meantime, you might want to call the HOA management company, if there is one, and file a formal complaint." After Officer Reeves left, I did exactly that. The Pinewood Meadows HOA was managed by a company called Premier Community Services, based in Denver. I called their emergency line and got a weary-sounding woman named Jennifer who listened to my story with increasing dismay. "Mr. Oakes, I need to be very clear about something," Jennifer said when I finished. "HOA board members do not have the legal authority to enter private property without permission, emergency situations excepted. And even then, there are protocols. What you are describing is not only against company policy, but potentially criminal." "That is what the police officer said," I replied. "I am going to contact our legal team immediately. We may need to suspend Miss Henderson pending an investigation. This is exactly the kind of liability nightmare we train board members to avoid. Jennifer sighed heavily. I am very sorry this happened. We will get your property returned to you as soon as possible. The rest of the day was quiet. The storm continued, though less intensely than the night before. I spent time returning client emails and working on scheduling for the following week, assuming the weather would eventually clear. Around 4 in the afternoon, my doorbell rang. It was Officer Reeves again, and he did not look happy. Mr. Oakes, we have a situation, he said. I went to Miss Henderson's house to discuss the chains. She refused to return them. She what? She claims they are being held as evidence of HOA code violations and will only be returned once you pay a fine of $500 and agree in writing not to use chains in the neighborhood again. I felt my blood pressure spike. That is extortion. That is exactly what I told her, Officer Reeves said grimly. I explained that she is not a law enforcement authority and has no right to confiscate property. I explained that she committed theft and could be arrested. She told me, and I quote, HOA rules supersede state law in private communities. That is not even remotely true, I said, stunned. No, it is not. I have contacted my supervisor and the district attorney's office, given Miss Henderson's refusal to cooperate and her attempt to extort money from you. We are going to pursue criminal charges. We will need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. Absolutely. Whatever you need. Officer Reeves hesitated, then added, there is one more thing. Miss Henderson claims she disposed of the chains because they were contraband. She said she dropped them off at a recycling center. My heart sank. She destroyed $400 chains. That is what she claims. We are checking with local recycling centers now, but if she did dispose of them, this becomes a more serious theft charge, plus destruction of property. After Officer Reeves left, I sat in my living room feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. How had a simple HOA dispute escalated to this point? Patricia Henderson had not only stolen my property but destroyed it out of some twisted sense of authority. My phone rang. It was Marcus from across the street. Hey, Tyler, you need to see what is going on at Patricia's house, he said. The police are back, and they are not alone. I bundled up and walked down my driveway, the snow up to my knees where it had drifted. 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street was Patricia Henderson's house, a large 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping, now buried in snow. 2 police vehicles were parked in front, along with an unmarked sedan. I stayed at a distance, not wanting to interfere, but close enough to see what was happening. Officer Reeves and another officer were standing on Patricia's front porch, talking to her. Even from 50 feet away, I could hear her raised voice, though not the specific words. She was gesturing wildly, clearly agitated. Marcus joined me, stamping his feet in the cold. She has been yelling at them for 10 minutes. Something about how they cannot arrest a HOA president for enforcing community standards. They are going to arrest her, I asked. Looks like it. That unmarked car is a detective's vehicle. I saw the guy's badge when he went inside. We watched as the situation on the porch continued. Patricia was now pointing at various houses in the neighborhood, including mine, apparently making some kind of argument. Officer Reeves remained calm and professional, but his body language suggested he was done negotiating. Finally, after another 5 minutes of discussion, Patricia was handcuffed. She immediately began screaming about lawsuits and violations of her rights. The officers led her to one of the patrol vehicles and placed her in the back seat. The whole neighborhood was watching now, people standing in their doorways or looking through windows. My phone buzzed with a text from Officer Reeves. Can you come to the station at 9 a.m. tomorrow for your statement? I replied, confirming I would be there. That evening, the local news covered the storm's impact on Colorado Springs. 16 to 20 inches of snow in most areas, multiple accidents on the highways, 2 deaths from weather-related incidents. They also mentioned that chain requirements for commercial vehicles would remain in effect for at least another 48 hours while crews worked to clear roads. The irony was not lost on me. Patricia had stolen my chains for being against HOA rules, chains that were legally required and would continue to be required. If I needed to use my truck for work tomorrow or the next day, I would have to buy new chains or risk getting ticketed by the actual police. The next morning, I made it to the Colorado Springs Police Department headquarters on Nevada Avenue. The roads were still treacherous, but main arteries had been cleared enough for careful driving. Without chains, my truck slipped and slid more than I would have liked, but I made it safely. Inside, I was directed to a small interview room where Officer Reeves and a detective named Sarah Walsh waited. Detective Walsh was a tall woman in her 30s with sharp eyes that suggested she did not miss much. "Mr. Oakes, thank you for coming in," Detective Walsh said, shaking my hand. "I have been assigned to investigate the theft of your property. Officer Reeves has briefed me on the basics, but I would like to hear the full story from you, start to finish." I spent the next 45 minutes going through everything again, this time even more detailed. Detective Walsh asked probing questions about my interactions with Patricia, the exact timeline of events, and my documentation of everything that had occurred. She seemed particularly interested in the HOA regulations and how Patricia had interpreted them. "So to be clear," Detective Walsh said, "your tire chains were required by state law for your commercial vehicle during the storm conditions on the day in question." "Yes, absolutely. I can pull up the Colorado State Patrol's website right now showing the chain law requirements for commercial vehicles." "Please do," she said, sliding a tablet across the table. I navigated to the Colorado Department of Transportation website and found the page explaining traction law requirements. I read aloud, "Commercial vehicles must carry chains in Colorado from September 1st through May 31st. When Code 15 is in effect, chains must be installed on at least 2 drive wheels." "And Code 15 was in effect that day?" Detective Walsh asked. "Yes, I checked before I left. It went into effect at 8 in the morning, 2 hours before Patricia confronted me." "It is actually still in effect right now." Detective Walsh made notes on her laptop. "So Miss Henderson stole legally required safety equipment from your commercial vehicle during active emergency road conditions." "That is correct," I said. "And then she destroyed that equipment, preventing you from legally operating your vehicle, and attempted to extort $500 from you for its return, despite having already destroyed it." "Also correct," I confirmed. Detective Walsh sat back and exchanged a look with Officer Reeves. "Mr. Oakes, this has escalated beyond a simple theft case. What we have here is theft of commercial equipment, destruction of property, attempted extortion, and potentially interference with a commercial operation. Miss Henderson was released on bond last night, but the district attorney is going to file multiple charges." "What does that mean for my chains?" I asked. "Unfortunately, we confirmed that Miss Henderson did take them to a metal recycling facility. They were processed within hours. Your chains are gone. However, you are entitled to restitution. The court will order her to pay you back the full replacement cost plus any additional expenses you incur as a result of not having them." "I already had to cancel 2 jobs today because I cannot legally drive without chains," I said. "That is about $800 in lost income." "Document everything," Detective Walsh advised. Every canceled job, every expense, every impact this has had on your business. When this goes to court, you will be able to present that in your victim impact statement and claim for restitution. I left the police station feeling slightly better. At least the system was working, and Patricia Henderson was going to face consequences. But I was still out the cost of new chains and had already lost business because of her actions. My next stop was a truck supply store where I purchased a new set of chains. These were actually better quality than my original ones, but they cost $540. I kept the receipt carefully filed in the folder I was building for court. Over the next week, as Colorado Springs slowly recovered from the massive snowstorm, the situation with Patricia Henderson and the HOA became the talk of Pinewood Meadows. The neighborhood gossip network was working overtime. I learned through various neighbors that Patricia had been president of the HOA for 6 years. During that time, she had become increasingly aggressive in enforcing rules, often interpreting them in the strictest possible way. Several residents had horror stories about frivolous fines and harassment over minor issues. Marcus told me about a couple who had been fined $300 for having a decorative rock in their front yard that was 2 inches larger than the HOA regulations allowed. Another neighbor had been cited for having grass that was 1/4 inch too tall during a particularly rainy spring when everyone was struggling to keep up with mowing. The thing is, Marcus explained as we stood in his driveway watching the snowplows finally clear our street, most people just paid the fines. It was easier than fighting. Patricia ruled through intimidation. Why did not anyone vote her out? I asked. Marcus shrugged. She stacked the board with her friends. And honestly, a lot of people just do not pay attention to HOA politics. They skip the meetings, do not vote in elections. Patricia counted on that apathy. Well, she picked the wrong person to mess with this time, I said. No kidding. You actually stood up to her, and now she is facing criminal charges. There is already talk about calling an emergency HOA meeting to remove her from the board. That emergency meeting happened 3 days later. I attended, along with about 60 other residents, which was apparently a record turnout for Pinewood Meadows. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance. The remaining board members, 3 people who looked deeply uncomfortable, sat at a table in the front. A lawyer from Premier Community Services was there, a serious-looking man named Robert Fitzgerald, who explained the situation in carefully chosen legal language. Due to pending criminal charges and the potential liability to the association, the management company and remaining board members have agreed that it is in the best interest of the community for Patricia Henderson to be removed from her position as president, effective immediately, Fitzgerald said. Additionally, we will be conducting a full audit of HOA actions over the past 2 years to ensure compliance with Colorado HOA regulations and community bylaws. The room erupted in conversation. Several residents stood up to share their own stories of Patricia's overreach. One elderly man talked about being fined for having his trash cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours, even though he had been physically unable to bring them in immediately after garbage collection due to a back injury. A young couple described being threatened with legal action for installing solar panels, even though Colorado law explicitly protects the right to install solar energy systems. The stories went on for an hour. It became clear that Patricia had created a climate of fear in the neighborhood, and now that she was facing consequences, everyone felt safe speaking up. I raised my hand and was called on. My name is Tyler Oakes. I am the one whose chains were stolen. I just want to say that I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to do my job and follow the law. But what happened to me, what happened to all of you, shows what happens when someone in a minor position of power decides rules matter more than people." There was applause. Marcus stood up next and suggested that the HOA rewrite its regulations to be less restrictive and more in line with how people actually wanted to live. More applause. By the end of the meeting, a new interim president had been elected, a reasonable-seeming accountant named Frank Morrison, who promised transparency and common sense. The board also voted to refund any fines that had been issued in the past year that residents felt were unfair, subject to review. The legal case against Patricia Henderson moved forward through the winter. I had to give a deposition, which was an interesting experience. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in her official capacity as HOA president and therefore had some kind of immunity. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Torres, demolished that argument quickly. "Your client entered private property without permission, removed and destroyed property worth over $400, and then attempted to extort money from the victim," Torres said during one hearing I attended. No HOA regulation, no board position, grants anyone the authority to commit crimes. Patricia's lawyer also tried to argue that my chains were a violation of HOA rules and therefore could be confiscated. Judge Martin Hendricks, presiding over the case, was not having it. "Counselor," Judge Hendricks said, "even if the HOA regulations explicitly prohibited tire chains, which the court notes they do not, that would be a civil matter resulting in potential fines through proper procedures. It would not grant authorization for self-help remedies involving theft and destruction of property. Your client had multiple legal options available. She chose instead to commit crimes. That is what we are here to address." In March, Patricia Henderson pleaded guilty to theft, criminal mischief, and attempted extortion as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 1 year of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay me full restitution, including the cost of replacement chains, lost business income, and legal fees. The total came to nearly $3,000. Additionally, she was banned from serving on any HOA board in Colorado for 5 years and required to attend anger management classes. I attended the sentencing hearing. Patricia looked diminished somehow, smaller than she had seemed during our confrontation in my driveway. When given the opportunity to address the court, she offered a half-hearted apology that felt more like she was sorry she got caught than sorry for what she had done. "I was trying to protect our community's property values," she said. "I may have been overzealous, but my intentions were good." Judge Hendricks was unmoved. "Miss Henderson, good intentions do not excuse criminal behavior. You violated Mr. Oakes's rights, damaged his livelihood, and created a climate of fear in your community. This court hopes you will use your probation period to reflect on the difference between community leadership and abuse of power." Outside the courthouse, Detective Walsh found me in the hallway. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Honestly, relieved it is over. I just want to get back to running my business without drama." "Well, you did good," Walsh said. "A lot of people would have just accepted the loss and moved on. By standing up for yourself, you probably helped a lot of your neighbors too." She was right about that. In the weeks following Patricia's sentencing, the atmosphere in Pinewood Meadows changed dramatically. The new HOA board adopted a revised set of regulations that were half as long and twice as reasonable. Fines for minor infractions were reduced or eliminated. The focus shifted from enforcement to actual community building. Frank Morrison, the new president, organized neighborhood events like a summer barbecue and a kids' Halloween party. People who had barely known their neighbors started talking to each other. The community center, which had mainly been used for HOA meetings under Patricia's reign, started hosting game nights and book clubs. My landscaping business thrived. Several neighbors hired me for projects, partly because they liked my work, but also, I think, because they respected how I had handled the situation with Patricia. I never advertised what had happened, but word gets around in a neighborhood. Marcus and I became good friends. We started a tradition of watching football games together on Sundays, sometimes joined by other neighbors. It was nice to feel part of a real community instead of just a collection of houses governed by arbitrary rules. The chains that had started the whole mess remained a topic of conversation. Every time a winter storm rolled through Colorado Springs, someone would joke about checking with the HOA before putting chains on their vehicle. But there was an edge to the jokes, a reminder of how easily power could be abused if people were not paying attention. In May, when the mandatory chain law season ended, I carefully stored my chains in my garage. They had cost more than my original set, but they represented something important to me now. A reminder that sometimes you have to stand up for what is right, even when it is easier to just go along. One afternoon, I was mowing my lawn when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s got out looking slightly nervous. "Are you Tyler Oakes?" she asked. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I am Jennifer Callahan. I am on the HOA board over in Sunset Ridge subdivision across town. I heard about what happened with your HOA president and the stolen chains. I was wondering if you would be willing to come speak at one of our meetings." I turned off the mower. "Speak about what?" "About HOA overreach and homeowner rights. We have been having some issues with our president going on power trips, and I think hearing from someone who successfully pushed back would be valuable for our community." I thought about it for a moment. The whole experience had been stressful and time-consuming. Part of me wanted to just forget about it and move on. But Jennifer looked genuinely concerned about her community, and maybe sharing my story could help others avoid similar situations. "Sure," I said. "I can do that." Over the next year, I ended up speaking at 5 different HOA meetings across Colorado Springs and even one in Denver. Each time, I told the same story: the illegal theft of my chains, Patricia's abuse of power, the importance of knowing your rights. And each time, I saw recognition in the faces of homeowners who had experienced their own versions of HOA tyranny. Some of those communities made changes. Others did not. But at least people were having conversations about the balance between community standards and individual rights. That felt important. The restitution payments from Patricia came slowly. The court had set up a payment plan based on her finances, which meant I received a check for $200 every month. It took over a year to receive the full amount, but I eventually did. I used part of the money to upgrade my truck with better snow tires, and the rest went into my business savings account. I ran into Patricia once, about 18 months after the sentencing. I was at a grocery store in Colorado Springs, loading bags into my truck, when I saw her walking across the parking lot. We made eye contact for a brief moment. She looked away quickly and hurried to her car. I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering resentment. She had faced consequences for her actions, paid her debt to society and to me, and that was that. Holding on to anger would not change what had happened or make the future better. By the 2-year anniversary of the chain theft, Pinewood Meadows had been completely transformed. Frank Morrison had been re-elected as HOA president, running unopposed. The neighborhood won a Community Service Award from the city for its volunteer snow removal program, where residents helped elderly and disabled neighbors clear their driveways after storms. My business had grown enough that I hired 2 employees, both local guys who did good work. I bought a second truck, which meant twice as much equipment to maintain, but also twice as much capability to serve clients. Life was good. One winter morning, as I was loading equipment into my truck for a job, I saw the chains hanging in my garage. They were clean and ready, just in case another storm rolled through requiring their use. I smiled, remembering that morning 2 years ago when Patricia had come marching down my driveway, so certain of her authority. She had thought HOA rules trumped state law. She had thought her position gave her the right to steal and destroy property. She had been wrong on every count, and that wrongness had cost her dearly. But more than that, her actions had accidentally sparked a change in our community. By being so egregiously wrong, she had galvanized neighbors into paying attention, speaking up, and demanding better. Pinewood Meadows was now run by people who understood that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. My phone rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from Monument, the client whose property I had been rushing to prepare the day Patricia stole my chains. "Tyler, I need to schedule my spring cleanup," she said. "Are you available next week?" "Absolutely, Mrs. Rodriguez. I will put you on the schedule. You are such a good young man. Always reliable, always professional. I tell all my friends about you." We chatted for a few more minutes about her yard and the mild winter we had experienced this year. After hanging up, I finished loading my truck and headed out for the day's jobs. The sun was shining, the roads were clear, and the chains hung safely in my garage, ready if needed but not required today. I pulled out of my driveway and drove through Pinewood Meadows, past well-maintained homes where people actually talk to each other, past the community center where a sign advertised an upcoming spring festival. It was a good neighborhood, not perfect, but good. And I had played a small part in making it that way, simply by refusing to accept injustice when it was done to me. Sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you never anticipate. Sometimes refusing to back down in the face of petty tyranny creates space for others to do the same. And sometimes, a stolen set of tire chains becomes the catalyst for genuine positive change. As I drove toward my first job of the day, I thought about all the people I had spoken to at various HOA meetings. The frustrated homeowners, the concerned board members, the property managers trying to maintain order while respecting rights. Each of them dealing with the constant tension between rules and reason, between order and freedom. There were no easy answers. Communities needed some regulations to function, but those regulations needed to be reasonable, fairly applied, and respectful of individual rights. It was a balance, and maintaining that balance required vigilance from everyone involved. The case had even caught some media attention. A local news station had done a story about HOA overreach, featuring my case along with several others. That attention had led to state legislators proposing new laws to clarify HOA authority and strengthen homeowner protections. I had even testified before a state house committee about my experience. The proposed legislation included provisions requiring HOAs to follow specific procedures before imposing fines, limiting the amount of fines for minor infractions, and creating an easier appeals process for homeowners. It had not passed yet, stuck in committee while various interest groups argued over details. But the conversation was happening, and that mattered. I thought about how random it all was. If I had not needed to make that emergency run to Monument that day. If Patricia had not confronted me about the chains. if she had simply written me a citation instead of escalating to theft. Any one of those variables being different would have changed everything. But that was life. Random moments, chance encounters, decisions made in the heat of anger or fear. And then dealing with the consequences for better or worse. Patricia Henderson had made her choices. I had made mine. The community had made theirs. And here we were, 2 years later, in a better place than we started. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Beer and football Sunday. Weather is supposed to be perfect. Definitely, I texted back. I will bring chips, simple pleasures, good neighbors, honest work. These were the things that mattered, not HOA regulations or power struggles or petty disputes over property lines and paint colors. Though I had to admit, there was some satisfaction in knowing that the next time a winter storm rolled through Colorado Springs and I needed to put chains on my truck, I could do so without worrying about some self-appointed authority figure stealing them. That was freedom, small but real. The drive to my job site took me past the metal recycling facility where Patricia had taken my original chains. I wondered briefly if the metal had been melted down and reused for something else. Maybe part of another vehicle's safety equipment. Maybe a bridge component or a construction beam. The atoms remained, transformed into something new, their original purpose lost, but their material value preserved. There was probably a metaphor in that, but I was not enough of a philosopher to tease it out. I just knew that life moved forward, things changed, and people either adapted or got left behind. Patricia had not adapted. She had clung to her rigid interpretation of rules and her inflated sense of authority until it destroyed her position and reputation. I hoped she had learned something from the experience, but that was not my responsibility. I had done what I needed to do, stood up for my rights, and let the system handle the rest. The job that day went smoothly. I trimmed trees, cleared debris, and prepared a flower bed for spring planting. My client, a friendly retired teacher named Mr. Patterson, brought me lemonade and talked about his grandchildren. It was pleasant, satisfying work, and I was grateful for it. On the drive home that evening, I passed through Pinewood Meadows as the sun was setting. Kids were playing basketball in a driveway. A couple was walking their dog. Someone was grilling in their backyard, the smell of burgers wafting through the evening air. Normal suburban life. Nothing dramatic or newsworthy. Just people living their lives, following reasonable rules, treating each other with basic decency and respect. It was everything an HOA should enable, and Patricia Henderson's tyrannical approach had nearly destroyed it. But the community had survived, adapted, and ultimately thrived. That resilience gave me hope not just for Pinewood Meadows, but for all the other neighborhoods struggling with similar issues. I pulled into my driveway and parked my truck in the garage, right next to where the chains hung on their designated hooks. They caught the light from the garage door opener, metal links gleaming, ready for service. Just equipment. Just tools. But also symbols of standing up for what was right, of refusing to accept injustice, of believing that individuals mattered more than arbitrary regulations. I went inside, made dinner, and settled in for a quiet evening. Tomorrow would bring new jobs, new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, in my house in my neighborhood where the HOA had finally learned its proper place, I was content. The story of the stolen chains would probably follow me for years. When people asked about my HOA, I would tell them about Patricia Henderson and her dramatic downfall. Some would find it funny. Others would recognize the deeper issues at play. But whatever their reaction, I would tell the story honestly, not to make myself look heroic or to demonize Patricia beyond what she had actually done. Just the facts, the consequences, and the lessons learned, because that was all any of us could do. Live our lives as honestly as possible. Stand up when something was wrong. Accept the consequences of our choices. Try to leave things a little better than we found them, and maybe, just maybe, inspire others to do the same.